The sky over the Gulf shimmered with a strange gray light, somewhere between storm and surrender. Wind moved slowly, thick with salt, wrapping itself around the pine trees and half-buried driftwood that marked the narrow stretch of coast outside the tiny Texas town of Marlow Bay. There were no skyscrapers here, no billboards, just a few houses crouched behind dunes and weather-beaten fences, and the old train depot turned airport where nothing landed that wasn't expected. And yet, when the plane touched down that morning, the stillness changed. Helena Strauss descended the narrow steps of the aircraft with a calm that felt unnatural in a place where people usually ran to embrace or wept in farewells. She moved like a shadow with purpose, her dark eyes unreadable beneath the brim of her wide straw hat. One hand held a soft grip on her daughter's shoulder. The other pointed to a clipboard carried by the man with the cargo manifest, her long fingers circling a single line. Piano upright, wooden, shipped with passenger. Beside her, Sierra looked up, serious as ever. Just 9 years old, but already carrying a weight in her posture that most people couldn't name. She was her mother's voice, interpreter, guardian, co-conspirator. She didn't cry when the plane landed. She didn't smile either. She just whispered to no one in particular. She says it needs to be placed somewhere dry, somewhere safe. The cargo workers nodded awkwardly and used to being spoken to like that by a child, and even less used to the quiet power of a woman who didn't speak at all. But they followed instructions, at least for the time being. The piano, wrapped carefully in a tarp, was wheeled out of a hold and lowered to the tarmac with cautious reverence. It had dents, scratches. One of the legs had been clumsily repaired, perhaps more than once. But it stood proud, like a loyal soldier from another century. Then came Logan Bennett, tall, sun-worn, and always moving as though he were just about to close a deal. Logan had the confident gait of someone who'd built something out of nothing and believed every inch of it was deserved. He'd made his fortune building eco-luxury properties up the coast, houses powered by solar, cooled by sea wind, painted in ethically sourced paint that changed color with humidity. He had opinions, many, but most notably, he had a house ready for a wife he'd never met. And now here she was. Helena, he said, the name stiff in his mouth, like a foreign object. Welcome. She nodded once. His eyes moved to the child. And Sierra, you've both had quite a journey. Again, Helena nodded. Sierra didn't speak. There was an awkward silence, one that might have been filled by casual small talk or a joke in another world. But Helena didn't offer anything, and Logan, uncomfortable, gestured toward the truck idling nearby. We should get going, he said. It's about an hour's drive to the house. You'll like it. Lots of windows. Very modern. You can see the ocean from the bedroom. Then he sawed the crate. He paused mid-step, adjusting the sleeves of his linen blazer like it would give him more authority. Is that what I think it is? Sierra answered softly. It's the piano. Logan's brows pinched together. You brought a piano. Helena didn't move. She simply looked at him. I thought you were bringing essentials. That's what we agreed, right? I designed the house with a specific layout. Everything's modular. The interior's minimalist. Sierra's tone hardened. She says it's not just a piano. Logan smiled, that kind of smile people use when trying to win a customer back. Look, I get it. You're an artist or something. But we don't really have space for that. He said that like it was a disease. Helena's gaze did not falter. Not for a second. She walked to the crate, placed her palm against the wooden side, and closed her eyes. For a breath. For a memory. The wind lifted her hair slightly, then dropped it again like a sigh. I mean, maybe we can find a place to store it, Logan added. I just think we should focus on moving in first, you know? Get settled. Think practically. Helena didn't respond. Sierra did. She says this is being practical. Logan laughed, but was thin and restless. There's no room. It's just a fact. We'll leave it here for now and figure something out. Without waiting for consent, he waved to the workers. Just leave it by the dunes. The tide won't reach it today. Sierra's face tightened. Helena didn't move to stop them. The crate was rolled to the edge of the sand and placed near a crooked wooden post once used to tether fishing boats. The piano sat there like an exile, its presence already an offense to the new world it had been dragged into. The tarp rustled under the breeze. From afar, it might have looked like a relic, something abandoned after a war no one remembered. Logan, now impatient, opened the passenger door of the truck. "Come on, let's go. You'll love the view." Helena hesitated. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out a small leather-bound notebook and a pencil, and scribbled a word. She held it up. "Stay." He blinked. "What?" Sierra leaned in. "She says she'll stay with the piano." "You're kidding, right?" Logan scoffed. "You're not staying here. That's absurd." But Helena was already sitting in the sand beside the crate, her knees folded beneath her, hands resting calmly in her lap. The wind pulled at her scarf. Sierra sat down beside her without asking permission. Logan stood there for a moment, unsure if this was a performance or the beginning of some kind of rebellion. But neither mother nor daughter flinched. Eventually he muttered, "Suit yourself," and drove off. The dust from the tires blurred his departure. The silence that followed was heavy but not empty. Helena placed a hand on the crate once more. Through the wood, she could feel it, the tension of the strings, the silence humming like a promise not yet broken. This wasn't stubbornness. This was survival. She closed her eyes and began to imagine the sound of the keys, each note rippling out into the air like threads tying her past to the soil beneath her feet. And so began a story built not with words, but with resonance. If something about this scene stirred you, if it made you wonder, ache, or pause even for a second, consider giving this video a like. Not because you're told to, but because stories like this deserve to keep echoing. And if you want to see what Helena does next, you know what to do. Subscribe, stay close. The silence has only just begun. The road to Logan's house twisted like a question that didn't want an answer. Helena sat in the passenger seat, unmoving, her profile etched against the blur of sand dunes and thin-limbed trees. Sierra sat in the back, hands clasped on her knees, trying not to fidget. Logan drove in silence, the occasional glance toward the rear-view mirror betraying a flicker of uncertainty. No one spoke. Only the hum of tires against the cracked asphalt filled the air. When they finally arrived, the house stood like a sculpture pressed into the earth, modern, angular, and flawless. Steel beams crossed high windows, and solar panels glinted like armor across the sloped roof. The color of sand, the building seemed to dissolve into the landscape, yet its symmetry felt alien among the swaying grasses and wind-worn driftwood. Logan stepped out first and opened Helena's door with a hesitant flourish, like a hotel concierge unfamiliar with silence. "Here it is," he said, arms wide. "Open concept, passive cooling, state-of-the-art everything." Helena stepped out, her long fingers brushing the edge of the car as she walked toward the front steps. Sierra followed close behind, her eyes darting everywhere, at the windmill, at the little patch of succulents by the door, at the hummingbird feeder swaying gently on its hook. But Helena's gaze didn't wander. She walked into the house without hesitation, as though she were entering a room already known to her. Inside, the floors were concrete polished to a reflective sheen. The walls were pale and bare, punctuated by tall windows that let in the sea air but little warmth. Everything was elegant and exact. The living room was furnished in grays and whites, with a single driftwood coffee table that looked too fragile to hold anything heavier than a thought. A kitchen gleamed at the far end, stainless steel appliances standing like sentinels. "This is the master," Logan said, opening a door to the left. "It gets the best light in the morning." Helena stepped inside. A large bed untouched, a single abstract painting on the wall, a blur of reds and blacks. A ceiling fan clicked softly, rhythmically, like a distant metronome. She nodded, once, then turned and walked back into the hallway. Logan opened another door. "Sierra's room. I made sure it had books. She'll find things to do." Sierra stepped in. On a small shelf were several glossy children's books about Texas wildlife and solar energy. A small desk faced the window. A plush bear sat waiting on the bed. "It's nice," she whispered, unsure if anyone wanted her opinion. Logan smiled, relieved at the first hint of approval. "Great. I'm glad." The next few days moved with the weight of wet wool. Helena didn't complain. She woke early, walked barefoot through the halls like a ghost mapping the layout of a new dream. She cooked simple meals with efficient movements, slicing fruit, heating oats, boiling water. She washed dishes, folded clothes, brushed Sierra's hair. She never wrote notes unless necessary. She never asked for anything, but she never smiled. She never hummed. And she never touched the keyboard on the small electric piano Logan had placed in the study as a gesture of goodwill. Its plastic keys remained silent, untouched, unwanted. Sierra, meanwhile, tried. She explored the backyard, following lizards with cautious curiosity. She asked Logan questions he answered with polite fatigue. She drew pictures of the beach and hung them on the refrigerator with magnets shaped like stars. She sang quietly to herself while brushing her teeth. But even her songs became softer as the days passed. The air in the house was always clean, always cool, always controlled. But Helena's breath was shallow in it, like she could never fill her lungs completely. Each morning, she walked outside to the ridge overlooking the beach. Each time, her eyes scanned the distance until she found the shape of the crate, still there but shifting, a little more sunken, a little more worn. Then one morning, the light was different. The tide had come farther than before. She saw it from the kitchen window, the glint of water lapping near the base of the crate. A cold grip closed around her chest. She didn't hesitate. Without shoes, she walked across the sand, her long strides unhurried but urgent. The breeze pushed against her, sticky with salt. When she reached the piano, she saw the water pooling beneath it, dark and full of seaweed. The bottom of the crate had splintered. One of the legs had snapped completely. The tarp, once tight, now flapped like a torn flag. Helena fell to her knees beside it. She pulled the tarp back, revealing the familiar wood, stained, salt-eaten, its polish dulled to a sickly matte. The keys, still mostly protected, stared up at her like teeth in a broken mouth. She pressed one, just one, and the sound it made was warped and hollow, like something drowned. Sierra had followed, but from a distance. She stood at the edge of the dunes, watching her mother's shape curve like a question mark over the broken piano. The wind lifted her curls. She didn't call out. She didn't move closer. She understood. Helena reached behind her, pulled the spare tarp she had folded beneath her arm, and began to cover the crate again, this time with more care. She tied the corners, pulled the slack, secured the knots with sharp, practiced gestures. Her fingers moved with desperation disguised as discipline. When it was done, she sat there. The tide kissed her toes. She didn't move. For her, this was not an object. It wasn't wood and string. It was breath. It was pulse. It was the memory of her mother's hands layered over her own. It was voice and pain and longing. It was her. And now it was rotting. She looked at the sea. The horizon pulsed with the promise of more storms. The salt was eating into her, too. Slowly, quietly, she closed her eyes. Back at the house, Logan stood behind the tall glass window, watching her. His arms were crossed. He said nothing, but for the first time, he looked uncertain, not about Helena, but about himself. And the silence between them stretched further than the shore. It was late afternoon when the black Tesla slid up the long gravel path that cut through the dunes toward Logan's isolated home. The sun, heavy and low, stretched long golden fingers across the beach grass, and the wind had quieted into a low, thoughtful hush. The car came to a slow stop near the front of the house, and from it stepped a figure who seemed, at once, out of place and yet completely at ease in any environment. Elon Musk didn't knock. He rarely did. Instead, he opened the front gate, made of sustainably sourced cedar and bordered by succulents, and stepped through with the slow confidence of a man who didn't require permission. He had come unannounced, as he often did in this part of the coast, where his private retreat wasn't far from Logan's ultramodern home. Musk's reputation in Marlow Bay was something between legend and anomaly, equal parts eccentric billionaire and elusive neighbor. Some said he came here to escape the noise of the world. Others whispered he was building something secret beneath the dunes. To Logan, he was both an occasional business partner and a wild card, which meant he tolerated him with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Didn't expect a visit today," Logan said, stepping outside in his socks, wiping his hands on a towel. "I was nearby," Musk replied simply, his voice always low, always deliberate. He looked past Logan's shoulder into the open interior of the house. "Didn't know you had guests." "They're not guests," Logan muttered. "They're my family. New family." "Right. The wife." Musk's gaze was already moving, cataloging details with the quiet precision of someone who noticed everything. His eyes landed on Sierra, who had appeared in the hallway, holding a red crayon in one hand and a half-finished drawing of a boat in the other. "She's 9, Logan offered awkwardly. "Bright. Talks a lot." "She's translating," Musk said, watching as Sierra turned and looked over her shoulder. Helena had just stepped into the frame, silent as a shadow. She didn't speak, of course, just stood there, her gray eyes calmly locked onto the new visitor. Her expression was unreadable, but there was no fear in it, only distance. Elon tilted his head, studying her as if she were a mathematical problem with a poetic twist. "She doesn't speak." "No," Logan said quickly. "Hasn't since she was a kid. No medical explanation. It's just how she is." "She signs," Sierra said firmly, stepping forward. "I translate." Helena moved her hand slightly, 3 fluid gestures. Sierra translated. "She says it's nice to meet you." Musk smiled. "Likewise. I'm Elon." He stepped forward, offering a handshake. Helena didn't extend hers. Instead, she nodded once, a slow acknowledgement, as if shaking hands would have been far too much, a lie dressed up in polite gesture. Elon withdrew his hand without offense. "What does she do?" he asked, directing the question to Sierra. "She plays piano." "Where?" Logan cleared his throat. "Well, it's complicated." Elon's eyebrows rose. "How can playing the piano be complicated?" "She brought one with her," Sierra answered, with a child's bluntness. "But he didn't let her keep it in the house." "She means we didn't have room," Logan interjected, a defensive edge in his voice. "It's old, probably not even in tune anymore. It's sitting on the beach like a sculpture no one asked for." Helena's expression didn't change, but her hand moved again. Sierra translated. "She says it's not a sculpture. It's her voice." Elon turned back to Helena, and for a moment, something flickered behind his eyes, a recognition, maybe, or a deeper curiosity. The house, the conversation, the late sunlight, it all faded. He was looking at her the way one might look at a piece of ancient code etched in stone. Something beautiful, unsolvable, and very much alive. "I'd like to hear her play," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. Logan laughed, trying to redirect the moment. "You and everyone else in town. The thing's half-rotted." But Elon wasn't listening anymore. Later that evening, with the sky bleeding into indigo and stars beginning to blink awake in the firmament, Musk drove slowly down the sand-packed trail that ran parallel to the beach. He left his car near a forgotten fence post and walked the rest of the way on foot, his shoes crunching softly over broken shells and wind-carved ridges in the sand. He heard it before he saw her. The notes were faint at first, low and deliberate, like someone remembering how to breathe after too long underwater. The melody wasn't classical, but it had structure. It told a story in rising and falling tension, in minor turns that never fully resolved. It was not performance. It was confession. Elon crouched behind the tall dunes, hidden from view, and listened. There was Helena, seated on a damp, warped bench that once belonged to a picnic table, now half consumed by sand. Her fingers moved with eerie grace, as though each note required careful negotiation with a part of her past. The piano's damage was clear. Some notes were dull, some didn't speak all, but still, The sound that emerged was haunting. A fragmented, wounded kind of beauty. The sea behind her seemed to hush in reverence. Her bare feet rested on the wet sand, toes curling slightly each time she pressed the pedals. She didn't look up. Her entire focus was within the frame of those keys, those hammers, that sound. To Elon, it was like witnessing an eclipse. Something rare, devastating, unexplainable. He stayed there for 10 minutes, maybe 20. He lost track. When the final note faded and Helena let her hands fall to her sides, the silence afterward felt sacred. She didn't turn around. She hadn't seen him. Or maybe she had and simply didn't care. Elon slowly backed away, returning to the trail under a moon that had just begun to rise. His mind, usually full of calculations, projections, ideas piled upon ideas, was strangely still. For the first time in a long while, Elon Musk didn't want to solve something. He just wanted to feel it. The morning air in Marlow Bay carried the scent of salt and metal, the kind that comes after a light rain that never quite broke into a storm. Logan sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through blueprints on his tablet, the glow of the screen casting a ghostly light over his face. Sierra poured cereal into her bowl with the clumsy precision of a child half listening to the world around her. Helena stood by the window, unmoving, her eyes following the distant shimmer of the sea. The light caught in her pale irises, making them look almost silver. The sound of tires on gravel broke the quiet. Helena didn't turn her head, but Sierra did. She peered through the slats of the blinds. "It's him again," she whispered. "The Tesla man." Logan didn't look up. "Of course it is." Moments later, Elon Musk was at the door. He entered without knocking, again, and brought with him a strange energy, like a wind changing direction. He wasn't dressed for business today. A black t-shirt, jeans, and boots still dusted with sand. His hair slightly disheveled. His mind clearly running on currents no one else could see. "I have a proposal," he said, skipping greetings altogether. Logan finally looked up, arching a skeptical brow. "Is it the land near the lighthouse? Because I already told you." "I want to learn piano," Elon interrupted. That caught Logan off guard. "I'm serious," Musk added, stepping into the kitchen like he owned the place. "I've always learned through immersion. Coding, physics, languages. Now it's time for music. I want to understand how sound moves emotion, from the inside." Logan blinked. "Okay, so you want a teacher?" "Yes, but not just anyone. I want Helena." For the first time, Helena turned away from the window. Slowly. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes locked onto Elon's with a stillness that felt ancient. Logan laughed, but it was thin, performative. "She doesn't even speak. How's she going to teach you?" "She plays," Musk said. "That's more than enough. I learn best by observation, pattern, repetition. She can show me. Besides, she speaks with her hands." Logan hesitated, weighing the request. Elon wasn't just a neighbor. He was a potential investor, a powerful ally, and, at least in Logan's world, an unpredictable benefactor. Saying yes was good business. Saying no was self-sabotage. "Fine," Logan said. "I'll talk to her." But Elon was already smiling. "Good. I'll see you both tomorrow. Around 5. And just like that, he left. Later that afternoon, Logan stood in the hallway just outside Helena's workspace. It was a small, glass-walled room at the far end of the house, filled with soft natural light and the faint scent of oil paint and varnish. She used it to restore old frames, polish wooden sculptures, and once, a lifetime ago, to sketch musical compositions. She sat on the floor now, barefoot, sanding the curved leg of a broken stool. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, her fingers lightly dusted with sawdust. Logan cleared his throat. She didn't look up. "Elon wants piano lessons," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "From you." Still, she didn't look up. "He says he wants to learn by watching. You don't have to speak. Just play. Let him imitate." No response. He shifted uncomfortably. I said yes. Now she raised her head, her gray eyes steady, her face unreadable. Logan folded his arms. "He'll be here tomorrow. I figured you'd want to prepare." Helena nodded once. "Oh," Logan added, almost as an afterthought, "I brought your piano in." That made her pause. He jerked his thumb toward the far end of the hallway. "It's in here now. Thought it made sense, since you'll be using it." And then he left, his footsteps echoing across the polished floors. Helena sat motionless for a long time. Then, slowly, she stood and walked toward the room at the end of the hall. The piano was there, not in the living room, not in the corner of the garage, but placed with care, well, with tolerable precision, in her atelier. The crate had been discarded. The legs had been repaired, though not by her. A new rug lay beneath it, catching the grit that still clung to the base. The keys, though, remained the same, weather-worn, imperfect, familiar. She stepped closer, her breath trembling slightly as she sat on the wooden bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She didn't press them. Not yet. Instead, she closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to remember her mother's hands on hers, guiding her through scales in their old house in Cape Town. She remembered the low hum of the city beyond the windows, the ache of learning, the comfort of repetition. She pressed one key, then another, softly, testing. The sound was uneven, faintly warped, but it was there. A glint passed through her eyes, barely perceptible. A flicker of warmth, or maybe defiance, or maybe life. She played a phrase, short, a question, then an answer. Sierra appeared quietly beside the doorway, holding a glass of water. "She says thank you," the girl whispered to no one in particular. "Not for the piano, for the reason." Helena kept playing. Later that night, after Sierra had gone to bed and the moon had risen pale and wide above the dunes, Helena stood at her window, staring toward the faint outline of Elon's home in the distance. Its lights were dim. The sea between them shimmered. For the first time since she arrived in Texas, Helena felt a pull, not to escape, but to step forward. Not because someone told her to, because she wanted to. Tomorrow, she would leave the house. Not to defend the piano, not to protect the past, but to teach, to share, and maybe, quietly, to begin again. The road to Elon's house cut through dunes and crooked fences, curving like a quiet invitation into the unknown. The morning was crisp, salt-tinged, with a sky so blue it felt unreal. Helena walked beside Sierra, their silhouettes long and dark against the sun-washed path. Sierra hummed quietly, swinging her arms, occasionally glancing up at her mother. Helena, as always, walked with purpose. Silent, straight-backed, her eyes never left the horizon. The house appeared gradually, almost shyly, nestled into a fold of the landscape. It wasn't ostentatious. In fact, it looked almost forgotten, until one looked closer. Beneath the climbing vines and stone-covered exterior were solar panels embedded seamlessly into the structure. Small drones flitted from flower to flower in the vertical garden wall, tending pollination. The entire property buzzed with a subtle, harmonious hum, like the chords of a song just beginning. Elon opened the door before they could knock. "Come in," he said, smiling, stepping aside. Sierra walked in first, her eyes wide. Whoa! Inside, the house was open and filled with light. Rough-hewn wooden beams intersected with sleek glass panels. There were no sharp corners. Everything curved, flowed, as if the architecture itself was designed to breathe. Plants spilled from shelves, clung to suspended baskets, and sprouted from cracks in decorative concrete walls. A small fountain murmured in one corner. Technology and nature existed not in conflict, but in conversation. And in the center of the main room, like a creature waiting to speak, stood the piano. It was new, clearly custom-made. The wood was dark walnut, polished to a deep sheen. The lid was open, revealing strings so clean they shimmered like silver thread. A single stool sat before it, unadorned. Simple. Waiting. Helena walked past Elon without a word. Her steps were soundless. She approached the piano like one approaches an altar, not with awe, but with certainty. This was sacred but also familiar. Hers. She sat. Sierra perched cross-legged on a round cushion not far off, eyes bright, cheeks flushed. Elon stood nearby, arms loosely folded, watching without expectation. Helena rested her fingers on the keys. She didn't look at Elon. She didn't speak. She simply began to play. The first notes were low, deliberate, pulling the room into stillness. They unfolded like a story half remembered, hesitant, aching, full of questions. Then came a shift, a ripple of hope, a glimmer of sunlight through fog. Her hands moved with restrained grace, touching the piano the way one touches an old friend returned from war. There was no showmanship, no drama, just clarity, patience, and depth. Elon didn't move. He listened, really listened. The music was not an instruction. It was not a lesson. It was a conversation without words. And he understood. He sat on the rug beside Sierra, not bothering with the extra chair nearby. His eyes followed Helena's hands, absorbing the patterns, the timing, the silence between notes. Occasionally, his brow furrowed, not in confusion, but in wonder. His fingers moved slightly on his knees, mimicking chords. When the melody shifted to something lighter, almost playful, Sierra laughed. She says that part reminds her of a kitten trying to walk on piano keys, the girl said, grinning. Helena didn't look over, but her left hand answered with a cascade of high notes, like paws tapping curiosity into sound. Elon tilted his head. How does she say so much without saying anything? She just does, Sierra shrugged. You have to feel it, not figure it out. Another ripple of music echoed through the space. Then Helena stopped suddenly. She turned her head slightly, as if hearing something far away. Then slowly, she lifted her hands from the keys. A single note lingered, suspended in the air like breath before snowfall. She stood. Without a glance at Elon, she walked toward the door. Wait, he said softly, rising to his feet. Is that it? Helena paused by the frame of the open door. She looked at him, not dismissively, but clearly. She moved her hand once. A single motion. Sierra translated. She says that was the beginning. Helena walked out. Sierra followed, but not before leaning close to Elon. She never plays like that for strangers. He nodded, eyes still locked on the piano. After they left, silence fell like a blanket over the room. The piano sat in the center, as still as it had been before, but something about it had changed. Or perhaps Elon had. He moved toward the bench. He sat. With hesitation, he raised his hands and pressed a single key, the same one Helena had left suspended in the air. It rang out, soft and clear, and faded into stillness. He sat there for a long time after, fingers resting on the wood. He didn't need to say it out loud. He had just heard a language he didn't know existed, and he wanted to speak it. The days began to blend gently, like ink dissolving into water. What started as lessons became something less definable, less structured, encounters, exchanges of presence. There was no syllabus, no agenda, no end goal. Helena would arrive with Sierra in the late afternoon, her presence always quiet but unwavering, like a shadow at the right angle of light. She no longer waited at the doorway. She walked directly to the piano and sat as if she belonged there. And Elon, always alert, always questioning, learned to wait. At first, she would play without looking at him. The same chord progressions, each note intentional, deliberate. Then, slowly, she began to gesture. A slight nod toward the lower register. A pause, eyes flicking to his hands. She showed him where to place his fingers, not by speaking, not even by writing, but by motion. Her hand over his, featherlight, shaping the chords. Then pulling away. His fingers clumsy at first, too mechanical. But he learned quickly. His hands, built for machinery and control panels, grew patient with hammers and dampers. Sierra sat nearby on a high-back chair, one leg swinging freely, the other tucked beneath her. A sketchbook lay open on her lap, half filled with quick portraits of her mother's hands, Elon's puzzled expressions, the lines of the piano lid. She didn't speak unless needed, but when she did, her words held a clarity far beyond her years. "She says you're pressing too hard," she'd say with a grin. "The piano's not your rocket console." Helena never corrected Sierra. She rarely corrected Elon either. Instead, she'd raise an eyebrow, tilt her head, tap a single key with a finger that lingered, showing pressure, timing, shape. A gesture of control wrapped in grace. The music changed too. What once had been melancholy and soaked in memory now shimmered with something lighter. The melodies she played between moments had a question in them, a playful tilt, as if she were teasing the air. She didn't laugh, not aloud, but she smiled. Faint, soft, the kind of smile you almost miss if you're not paying attention. Elon noticed every time. He never mentioned it, but he always smiled back, his version a slight softening of his usual intensity. The lines at his eyes shifted, his posture leaned closer. He started asking questions with his silence, lingering near her hands as she played, trailing the arc of her wrist, the lift of her elbow. His eyes didn't always watch the keys. Often they watched her. He tried to disguise it as fascination with the process, but Sierra saw through it. One afternoon, while Helena tuned a sequence on the higher register, Elon sat cross-legged on the floor beside Sierra, flipping through one of her sketchbooks. "She likes you," Sierra said flatly, without looking up from her page. Elon blinked. "Does she?" "She smiles. She doesn't do that for people. Only for me, and maybe birds." Elon chuckled. "I'm honored to be in such company." Sierra looked up, serious. "Don't mess it up." He raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "She's not like other moms. She's made of different things." Elon nodded, sobered by the weight behind the girl's words. "I won't." Later, when Helena joined them again, she gestured briefly to Elon for notes in a quick sequence, her left hand offering rhythm while her right guided shape. He tried, got it wrong, tried again. "No," Sierra said gently, imitating her mother's tone. "Listen before you play." He tried again, this time waiting, mimicking her tempo more than her notes. And Helena nodded. That was enough. She sat beside him on the bench, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She didn't seem to mind. Her fingers danced, then paused, inviting him to follow. The air was warm, thick with the scent of lemon balm from the indoor garden. The drone of insects outside was low and steady, like a background metronome to the afternoon's rhythm. They played together, not in unison, but in tandem. Her lead, his echo, sometimes reversed. Sometimes she would stop mid-phrase and look at him, just for a second, as if to say, "Did you hear what I meant?" And sometimes he did. He began to notice other things. The way she shifted her weight slightly when approaching an intense chord. The way her breath stilled before a minor transition. The subtle tremble in her wrist when playing something she hadn't touched in years. Her entire body spoke, more clearly than any voice he'd ever known. And when the music faded, they didn't speak. There was no need. The quiet stretched between them, not as a void, but as a canvas. And Sierra, always watching, always measuring, filled the silence with her tiny stories of birds she'd seen nesting in the beams, of the names she'd given each plant in the vertical garden, of the dream she had where the piano grew legs and walked into the ocean. Sometimes Helena would raise her eyebrows in amusement. Sometimes she'd rest her hand on Sierra's head, just for a moment. A rare touch, always precise. One evening, when the session ended and Helena stood to gather her things, Elon reached toward the keys and pressed the same chord they'd played together an hour before. It was hesitant, off-key, but Helena turned and paused. She looked at him. The corners of her lips lifted, barely. She moved her hand once, a fluid gesture. Sierra translated with a yawn. She says, "It's better." Helena walked out. Elon remained at the piano for a while, eyes on the empty bench beside him. He didn't know what tomorrow's lesson would bring, but he knew he wanted more of this. Not just music, not just progress, more of her, more of the soundless language he was just beginning to understand. It was the kind of afternoon when the light hung low and golden through the windows, casting long, shifting shadows across the polished floor. The air inside Elon's home was still warm, heavy with the fragrance of jasmine blooming in the indoor garden. Helena had arrived as usual, silent, composed, hands folded in front of her, followed closely by Sierra, who darted ahead and flopped onto her usual cushion, already sketching before her mother reached the piano. Elon was already seated on the bench, waiting. There was a casualness to his posture now. He no longer tried to impress or pretend he wasn't curious. He simply was. And Helena, for all her poise, no longer kept her distance like she once had. She moved differently now. She lingered after notes. She allowed herself to watch him when he wasn't looking. But none of that was spoken. Helena sat beside him without a word and played a few soft notes, coaxing a chord sequence that was half memory, half invention. Elon mimicked her, his hands deliberate, sometimes hesitant. The progress was real if unremarkable, but that no longer seemed to be the point. They had just finished a phrase when Elon, feeling unusually confident, jumped ahead, attempting to mirror what Helena had only just begun to play. His fingers struck an awkward combination, off-key, dissonant, and unexpectedly loud. He winced, then laughed. "I think I just insulted the piano," he joked, turning his head toward her. Helena didn't laugh, but her lips parted, and a soft breath of amusement escaped her. The tiniest reaction. Then she leaned over from behind him, placing one hand lightly on his shoulder, the other moving to adjust his right wrist. Her touch was precise, measured. But in that motion, deliberate as it was, her fingers brushed against the inside of his palm. And he stilled. So did she. The touch was brief, a moment no longer than a blink. But something passed through it, electric, undeniable. Her skin, usually cool and composed, met his warmth in a quiet collision that neither had anticipated. Her breath caught just barely, and when she stepped back, it was too quickly, too suddenly, as if the room had shifted without warning. Helena turned away, pretending to adjust the music sheets that weren't even in use. Elon sat frozen, unsure whether to speak or remain still. But she didn't look at him, not right away. Across the room, Sierra pretended to be absorbed in drawing. Her pencil scratched gently against the page, but her ears were sharpened by instinct. She knew something had happened. She didn't look up. She didn't ask. But the way her shoulders stiffened said enough. When the silence finally broke, it wasn't with music. It was with motion. Helena sat down again, this time a little farther from him. She gestured to a single chord progression. Elon followed, quieter now. They played, yes, but the air between them had changed. It was thicker. Every silence carried a pulse. After the session, instead of leaving promptly, Helena lingered. Elon, as if testing the edges of this new atmosphere, stood and walked to the kitchen area. "Would you like tea?" he asked, his tone light, hesitant. Usually, Helena would shake her head. Today, she nodded. Sierra looked up in surprise, but said nothing. She returned to shading in her drawing, though her glances now flicked more often toward her mother. Helena sat down on the wide window bench, facing the view of the dunes. The evening sun painted her skin with warm tones, making the porcelain of her face seem almost glowing. Elon brought her a cup without ceremony and sat opposite, beside a small wooden table littered with books and circuits. She took the cup carefully, nodded in thanks, and held it between both palms. They didn't speak, but the silence now was not empty. It was filled with everything they couldn't say. The tea steamed softly between them, and the only other sound was the occasional rustle of pages as Sierra turned to a new sheet in her sketchbook. Helena's eyes wandered. She scanned the shelf beside her, rows of books Elon had read and reread. Physics, poetry, philosophy. She tilted her head, pausing at a worn spine. The unbearable lightness of being. He noticed. "That one's complicated," he said quietly. "I've read it 5 times. Still not sure I get it." Helena reached out, ran a finger along the edge of the spine, but didn't remove it. Sierra piped up, still sketching. "She says that's the point. You're not supposed to get it. Just feel it." Elon smiled at the child's intuition. "You're both full of mystery." Sierra shrugged. "I live with her." Helena's eyes twinkled faintly, her lips curling, not quite a smile, but something close. She sipped her tea. Elon watched her carefully, as if afraid to break the moment. There was no returning to how things had been before the touch. The rules had shifted. The next afternoon, they didn't start with scales or exercises. Helena sat beside him and simply played a fragment of a song, one he didn't recognize. It was slower, warmer. It unfolded like a conversation whispered late at night, full of pauses and breath. Elon didn't interrupt. He didn't mimic this time. He just listened. And Helena, now visibly more at ease, leaned into the music with a softness he hadn't seen before. The rigid perfection of her technique had melted slightly, replaced with something more fluid, more human. She swayed as she played. Her fingers loosened, and when she reached the final chord, she let it linger. She turned to him, not with instruction, but with invitation. He reached out, not to play, but to match her gaze. Their eyes held. Not long, just long enough to say everything neither had spoken. And across the room, Sierra looked up from her sketchbook with a raised eyebrow. She didn't smile, but she began drawing again. Two figures seated at a piano, a beam of sunlight falling between them. And above them, in the space where sound lives, she sketched a single, unspoken note. Suspended, waiting. The note was folded neatly, its edges sharp and precise, like everything Elon did when words weren't enough. He didn't hand it to Helena directly. Instead, after one of their now familiar lessons, he left it on the music stand of the piano, weighted by a small, smooth stone from the garden outside. Helena saw it as she gathered her things. Sierra had already darted ahead, chattering about something she'd spotted near the greenhouse. Elon stood nearby, pretending to scroll through something on his phone, though his posture betrayed anticipation. Helena approached the piano without looking at him. She picked up the note, unfolded it carefully. Inside, in bold, slightly uneven handwriting, was a simple message. Stay a little longer after the next lesson. She didn't react. Her face remained composed, unreadable. But she read it twice. Then, without comment, she folded the paper back along its creases, tucked it into her coat pocket, and turned toward the door. As she passed Elon, her shoulder brushed as lightly, whether intentionally or not, neither of them would later be able to say. No words were exchanged, but the note had been received. The following afternoon arrived draped in gray clouds and the soft hush of an oncoming drizzle. The sea beyond the dunes was restless, whispering secrets to the wind. Helena and Sierra arrived precisely on time, as always. The door opened without knocking. Elon stood waiting inside, not dressed for guests, barefoot, sleeves pushed up, a faint smudge of graphite on one wrist from tinkering with some prototype earlier that morning. "Hi," Sierra called as she stepped in. "Smells like mint. Did you clean?" "I did," Elon replied, glancing toward Helena. She didn't smile, but she nodded in acknowledgement. Her eyes, sharp and still, seemed to scan the room like always, taking in the subtle changes, the cushions rearranged, the tea kettle already warm on the stove, the folded blanket on the window bench. Without a word, she crossed the room and took her usual place at the piano. The lesson unfolded with its usual quiet rhythm. Helena played, demonstrated. Elon followed. Sierra offered playful corrections. They laughed at missed notes. The air, though heavier than before, still moved with a strange grace. But beneath it all, an unspoken tension vibrated between each chord, each glance, each touch of hand to key. When the final arpeggio faded into the room, Helena stood, smoothing the creases in her sleeve. She stepped back, waiting for Sierra to gather her things. The girl slung her bag over one shoulder and headed toward the door, then paused. Helena looked at her and with a subtle motion of the hand gave her a cue. "Can I go look at the frogs in the fountain again?" Sierra asked, eyes flicking between her mother and Elon. "Just for 5 minutes." Helena gave a slight nod. Sierra grinned and slipped outside, the door closing behind her with a hush of air. Now it was just the two of them. Helena stood in the center of the room, not moving. Elon remained near the window, hands in his pockets. Neither seemed sure what to do next. Then Helena turned back to the piano. She sat, not beside him, alone, and she began to play. The melody was unlike anything Elon had heard from her before. It wasn't complex or showy. It was slow, fragile, each note trailing the next like footprints in sand that the tide hadn't yet reached. It told no story, or maybe it told all of them. He didn't speak, didn't move. When the final note came, it was a high, almost tentative sound, held longer than expected. And then nothing. A silence so complete it vibrated. She didn't look at him right away. She let the absence of sound sit between them like a third presence. When she finally turned, her gray eyes met his and held. Elon took one step forward, then another. He stopped beside the piano and extended his hand. Not urgently, not expectantly, just a gesture, a question made flesh. Helena's eyes dropped to his palm. She didn't move, not at first. Then her own hand, steady, pale, and long-fingered, rose from her lap and settled into his. She didn't grip. She didn't flinch. She just accepted. And for a long time, they stood that way, surrounded by the soft hum of the house and the distant tapping of rain on the glass. No words were spoken, but something had been said, and something had been answered. When Sierra returned, she found her mother still seated at the piano and Elon standing nearby, both of them in comfortable silence. Helena turned to her daughter and gestured. Sierra tilted her head. She says we're staying a little longer today. And just like that, they did. The changes in Helena were so subtle that only someone who had lived beside her silence could sense them. She moved through the house with the same grace as before, but her eyes, those pale, listening eyes, lingered on things longer now. The birds outside the window, the texture of a curtain in the breeze. Even Logan. She didn't speak, of course, but something had shifted, and Logan felt it before he understood it. At first, it was easy to dismiss. Perhaps she was adjusting, settling in. Maybe she was finally becoming what he hoped for, present, responsive, involved. But even in his optimism, Logan knew better. Her presence wasn't leaning toward him. It was leaning outward, somewhere else. She was grounded in the world, but not in his world. Not anymore. He noticed the small things first. She would return from her lessons with a faint flush in her cheeks, a looseness in her posture. She played her piano at home more often now, not melancholic improvisations, but structured melodies, as if rehearsing something meant to be remembered. And then there were the silences different from before. Not defensive, not withdrawn, but full, like a room recently vacated of something intimate. One afternoon, Logan came home earlier than expected. A meeting had been canceled, and instead of staying at the office, he decided to take the opportunity to reconnect with his family. It had been weeks since he'd spent time with Helena outside of shared space and routine. He told himself this was his chance to rebuild. The house was quiet when he stepped inside. The faint scent of wood polish and tea hung in the air. He called out, "Helena," but received no answer. Then he heard the soft scratch of pencil on paper. He followed the sound to the window bench in the living room, where Sierra sat, completely absorbed in her drawing. She didn't hear him at first, her brow furrowed in concentration, the tip of her tongue pressed against the corner of her lips. "Hey," Logan said gently, trying to smile. She looked up, startled. "Oh, hi. What are you working on?" "Just drawing." He stepped closer. The paper in her lap was nearly full. A scene sketched in colored pencil, a shoreline at sunset, a piano, clearly Elon's, drawn with unmistakable detail, set in the sand. And beside it, two adults, a man and a woman, one seated, one standing, holding hands. The woman had dark hair pulled back and pale skin. The man's face was left vague, but his posture was unmistakable, tall, composed, with eyes turned toward her. Logan's mouth went dry. "What's this?" he asked, more harshly than he intended. Sierra's body stiffened. She closed the sketchbook quickly. "It's just a picture. It's not real." "Why were they holding hands?" he pressed, his voice tightening. She said nothing. "Is this supposed to be your mom?" he asked, jaw set. Still nothing. "Sierra. She just plays piano, okay?" The girl snapped, her voice suddenly shrill. She plays and he listens. That's all. Who's he? But Sierra shook her head, eyes wet now, lips trembling. You don't see her like I do. Logan stood still for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out. The drive to Elon's house was short, but each second felt jagged. His hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary, and his mind churned. The wind outside bent the grasses flat, and the sky above looked bruised with an incoming front. He pulled up to the house with no plan, just instinct. He rang the bell. No one answered. He tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the room was exactly as he remembered, open, soft, clean. Plants hung in woven cradles, and the scent of something herbal lingered in the air. There was no sound, no footsteps, no laughter, but the presence was palpable. Then he saw the piano. Not just any piano. The piano, dark walnut polished, elegant, just as Sierra had drawn. It sat at the center of the room like a shrine, the bench slightly pulled out, as if someone had just been there. Logan walked closer, breathing through his teeth. He reached out and pressed a single key. The sound rang out clean and full. It wasn't proof, but it was enough. He stood there for a long time, his reflection faint in the black lacquer of the lid. He saw his own face, tense, older than he remembered, etched with a quiet rage he couldn't quite justify. He had no photograph, no message, nothing he could point to and say here is betrayal. And yet, it was everywhere. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, staring at the keys. This wasn't something he could fix with a business solution or a well-timed apology. This was the kind of thing that eroded a man from the inside. Because the truth wasn't that Helena was leaving him. It was that she had never really arrived. She had walked into his house with her silence intact, her walls unshaken, and he had mistaken her stillness for peace. Mistaken her for something he could keep. But now she was reaching for something. And it wasn't him. He left the house without touching anything else. As he stepped outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. They hit the ground softly, just like everything he was trying to ignore. The light in Elon's living room was golden that afternoon, the kind of light that made things appear softer than they were. Outside, the wind had quieted, and inside, the air held a rare kind of hush. There were no phones, no interruptions, no time ticking loudly in the background. Just the piano, and three people sharing the same space, but not quite the same thoughts. Helena sat down at the bench like she had done many times before, but something was different now. Not in her face. Her expression was as still and composed as always, but in the way her fingers hovered over the keys. They trembled, barely, but Elon noticed. Sierra, too, standing nearby with her sketchbook loosely held against her chest, caught it with the attentive instinct of a child who had learned that the spaces between adults often spoke louder than their words. Helena didn't look at Elon. Didn't need to. She knew he was watching. His gaze had weight, and over the last few weeks, it had shifted from curiosity to something deeper, quieter, but more insistent. What had begun as lessons had unraveled into something wordless, and now she was ready to test the silence. Her fingers found the keys. One note, E-flat, soft, prolonged, as if asking a question. Elon leaned slightly forward, his hands resting on his knees, heart steady but alert. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink too fast. He let the note live. Then came another. G, a warm interval like a door cautiously opening. She continued slowly, almost reluctantly, weaving notes like strands of a thread, fragile and golden and incomplete. Her body moved with them, swaying slightly, her breath synchronized with the rhythm of the music. Sierra stepped closer, but didn't say a word. She simply sat cross-legged on the floor, like a quiet witness at a sacred ceremony. She looked from her mother to Elon and back again, sensing that something intangible was changing, like watching fog lift from a mountaintop to reveal a landscape that had always been there. Helena's melody was simple. No bravado, no flourishes. But every note was deliberate, honest, and Elon felt it, not just heard it, but truly felt it. As if the sound was not coming from a piano, but from Helena herself. Her gray eyes never left the keys, but he saw how her jaw softened, how the lines around her mouth eased as she played. For the first time, there was a kind of openness in her face. Not vulnerability, not yet, but a quiet courage, like someone gently peeling back a bandage. Elon had always been a man of logic, of systems and metrics and measurable risks. But this was something else. This was not science. It was surrender. He found himself closing his eyes briefly, not to block out the moment, but to absorb it fully. And when he opened them again, Helena was looking at him. Just for a second, long enough for him to know the music was meant for him. The final chord came like a whisper. It didn't resolve the melody. It didn't need to. It just stopped, leaving the room drenched in a sound that no longer existed, but still lingered in the air. Helena stood. She didn't smile, but her expression had changed. Her mouth was no longer tightly drawn. Her posture had loosened, the controlled grace now touched with a softness Elon had not seen before. Sierra remained still, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open, as if unsure whether to speak or remain part of the music. Elon cleared his throat gently, as if even that small sound could shatter the delicate fabric of what had just happened. That, he said quietly, was beautiful. Helena didn't respond. She only looked at him. Her eyes, gray and calm, held something deeper than gratitude, something closer to acknowledgement. She didn't need to say thank you. The melody had said everything. Sierra finally broke the silence in her own way, standing and tiptoeing toward her mother. "Can you teach me that one?" she whispered. Helena crouched beside her, placed a hand on Sierra's curls, and nodded. But it wasn't the same nod she gave when Sierra asked about brushing teeth or finishing vegetables. This was a promise, a passing of something old, something sacred. Later, while Sierra was outside sketching under the fig tree, Elon walked over to the piano. Helena was still standing near it, arms crossed lightly, her fingers resting against her upper arms. He looked at the keys, then at her. "I want to understand," he said. Helena tilted her head. "You already do," she replied. Her voice, rarely used, was low and clear, melodic in its own right. "I don't know how to play," he admitted. She stepped closer. Her hand hovered over his, not touching this time, but guiding. "Then don't play," she said. "Listen first, then follow." He pressed the E-flat she'd started with. It sounded different under his hand, tentative, uncertain. She nodded. Again. He did. It came out cleaner, less anxious. "Now add the next," she said. He hesitated, found the G, and played it. Their eyes met as the harmony vibrated softly in the wood of the piano. "Good," she said, and her lips curved just slightly. Almost a smile. The sun was lower now, streaking the room with warm amber lines through the window slats. It touched her hair, caught the escaping strands, and set them glowing like thread. Her hand brushed against his again, accidentally this time. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. Outside, Sierra hummed to herself as she sketched. Inside, a note lingered, and in the quiet between them, something new had begun. An understanding not rooted in language or logic, but in a sound, a presence, a shared stillness. A first note. The knock on the door was sharp, but not aggressive. 2 raps, too quick, too light to be threatening, but somehow unmistakably tense. Elon looked up from the piano where he sat with Sierra perched beside him, fingers dancing playfully over the high notes. Helena, who had just begun to trace the first few chords of a soft piece, froze mid-motion. She knew the rhythm of that knock. Before anyone could rise, the door opened. Logan stood in the frame, backlit by the fading light of early evening, his shoulders squared, his expression unreadable. He was dressed in his usual pale work shirt, sleeves still rolled, jaw tight. His eyes scanned the room with soldier-like precision. The piano slightly turned toward the sunlight, the open teacups on the table, the warm disarray of a space lived in, shared. Then they landed on Helena, and stayed. Sierra jumped up and ran to him. "Daddy, you're early." Logan bent to greet her, arms automatic, but his eyes never left Helena's face. She didn't move. The tension in the room was quiet, like a string pulled taut. Nothing was said, but everything shifted. Elon rose slowly, hands casually brushing the sides of his pants. "Logan," he said with a neutral nod. "Didn't know you were stopping by." "I didn't either," Logan replied, his voice level. "Just thought I'd pick Sierra up myself." Sierra tugged his hand. "We were playing a duet. Mom showed him how to make it sound like birds talking to each other." Logan smiled down at her, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Did she?" Helena still hadn't spoken. She stood, finally, and closed the piano lid softly. Her eyes met Logan's, not defensively, not pleadingly, just directly. Elon said nothing, respecting the invisible perimeter that had suddenly grown between them all. Logan looked around once more, taking in the signs, the blanket on the bench, the music sheets crumpled slightly, the pencil Sierra had left on the floor. The space didn't just look occupied. It looked shared. "I'll wait in the car," he said flatly. Sierra opened her mouth, confused, but Helena made a small motion with her fingers. Sierra frowned but obeyed, giving her mother a long, searching look before following Logan out the door. It closed with a quiet click. The silence between Helena and Elon lingered like fog. "I'm sorry," he said after a while. "I didn't know he was coming." She shook her head once, slowly, then stepped back from the piano. She didn't look shaken. She looked resolved. "I don't want to make things harder for you," he added. She turned to him, pulled out her small notebook from her bag, and scribbled something quickly. Then tore the page from the spiral and handed it to him. It read, "Nothing worth playing is ever easy." He read it twice, then once more. She was already at the door by the time he looked up. "Will you come back?" he asked, softer this time. She paused, a faint nod. Then she left. That night, the wind was louder than usual around the corners of the house. Logan sat in the kitchen, elbows planted on the table, the half-empty whiskey glass sweating beneath his hands. Helena stood by the counter, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the shadows moving outside the window. "I wanted to stop," he said finally. Helena said nothing. "I know what's going on," he continued. "Maybe not all of it, but enough." She reached for her notebook, flipped past pages of old phrases, music notations, and quick observations. She wrote carefully, turned it toward him. "You know what you fear. That's not the same." He exhaled slowly through his nose. "I'm your husband, Helena." Her pen scratched again. "You married my silence, not me." The words landed like a slap. He stood, pushing the chair back with a low screech. "I never asked you to be someone you're not." She looked at him, head tilted slightly. Her pen moved again. "No, you asked me to be quiet where it hurt the most." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a few steps before stopping near the window. "I didn't sign up for this triangle. For you, emotionally wandering off with a man who doesn't even speak the same language as us." She wrote again, slower this time. "He listens. That's all I've ever needed." Logan turned sharply. "And what about Sierra?" That name, Sierra, hung in the air with weight. Helena didn't write anything, but her face shifted, softened, cracked just slightly. "You think this won't affect her?" he pressed. "That she doesn't feel it? The tension? The divide?" She didn't move. He sat down again, exhausted now. "Just stop going to his house. Please." A long pause. Helena opened her notebook one more time. She didn't look at him while she wrote. Then she tore the page out and placed it gently on the table before walking away. He picked it up. The words were simple, and yet they made his throat close. "The silence you impose is the only one I cannot accept." The days that followed moved with strange stillness. Sierra asked fewer questions. Helena played only when alone. Elon waited, quietly. A new kind of rhythm settled in, a dissonant one, offbeat and unresolved. But within that unease, something else stirred. A realization in Logan's chest, painful and sharp. He had never understood the music. And now, for the first time, he was beginning to hear what he'd missed. It happened just before dawn. The sky above the Texas horizon was a dull, indifferent gray, the kind of light that made everything look like it was holding its breath. Inside the small, rented house on the edge of town, Logan Bennett paced the kitchen barefoot, each step across the cold linoleum like a quiet explosion in his chest. A hammering storm of emotions thrashed behind his pale eyes: rage, betrayal, fear, and that peculiar brand of loneliness that only men who feel replace know. Helena slept in the adjacent room, her body curled in on itself, the outline of her back visible beneath the cotton sheets. The silence between them had grown roots since their last confrontation. Not angry words, not even sighs, just a vacuum. One she filled with silence, one he filled with thoughts he couldn't stop. It wasn't just the music, it was what it had brought back to her face, the spark, the softness, a glow he hadn't seen in years. And it wasn't him she played for. It wasn't him who lit her from within. Logan opened the back door and stepped out into the damp morning. The grass was slick, still half asleep. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands and stared at the object that had, over the weeks, come to represent everything he feared, the piano. It sat there under a tarp, like a secret waiting to be discovered. He hadn't had the strength to do this in daylight. But now, under the veil of early morning, he wasn't Logan the father, the provider, the restrained husband. He was just a man with something broken inside. He fetched the axe from the shed. It took the first blow, like a groan. The sound was sickening, a wooden echo of violation. Then the strings snapped, one by one, with piercing metallic twangs, like nerves tearing free. The keys, those gentle witnesses to months of silent communion, flew like shattered teeth into the grass. Inside, Sierra's scream cut the air. High-pitched, disbelieving. Helena sat up instantly. The emptiness beside her in bed told her everything she needed to know. She ran barefoot, Sierra at her heels, out into the backyard. And then she stopped. Time did not freeze. It collapsed. The piano was no longer a piano. It was a corpse. A violent, unrecognizable sculpture of grief and fury. Helena didn't scream, didn't lash out. She walked slowly, as if in a trance, until her knees gave out before the wreckage. Her long, graceful hands hovered above the splintered keys. One landed gently, then the other, like she was praying over them. Her head bowed. Sierra clung to her from behind, trembling. Logan stood on the porch. The axe was still in his hand, hanging like the consequence of a decision he wasn't sure he made consciously. His chest heaved, not from exertion, but from the terrible aftermath of certainty. The clarity he'd craved had arrived too late. He hadn't destroyed a thing. He had destroyed a language, a sanctuary, a heartbeat. Helena lifted her head and looked at him, not with hatred, not even anger, but with a distance so vast it became a wall he would never again climb. She said nothing, but her silence was the loudest thing he had ever heard. Later that day, Elon received a message from Sierra. Not a call, not a voice note, just a photo, a ruined piano, and a handwritten sentence in Sierra's careful block letters below it. Mom didn't cry, but I think she broke. Elon didn't reply. He read it again and again. Then, with slow deliberation, he placed his phone on the table and walked to the window. The house was filled with filtered afternoon light, golden and quiet. The piano Helena had once touched now stood under a cloth, untouched since the last lesson. He lifted the cloth. His fingers hovered above the keys, then pressed one. A soft, resonant note filled the room, pure, unbroken. The contrast made his chest tighten. Some silences are violent, he whispered to no one. That evening, Elon drove across town. Not to Helena's house, he knew better. He went to a place most had forgotten, a small carpenter's shop run by a man named Ephraim who used to restore church organs before they stopped funding sacred music. Elon had helped him once with solar panels. Ephraim owed him. I need a piano built, Elon said. The old man looked up from a bench littered with wood shavings. You want to buy one? No, Elon replied. I want to build one. From scratch. With you. Ephraim narrowed his eyes. You know what you're asking. I do. And why are you asking it? Elon didn't hesitate, because it's not just an instrument. It's a language I'm learning. And someone destroyed her dictionary. The man studied him for a moment, then nodded once. Come back tomorrow. We'll start with the soundboard. Back at her home, Helena sat in the quiet living room. Sierra was asleep on the couch, exhausted from crying, without tears. Logan had left hours ago. Where, Helena didn't ask. She just needed space. Air that wasn't wrapped in resentment. She picked up her notebook. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote, "There are losses we don't mourn with tears, but with silence and rebuilding." She looked out the window. The stars were beginning to pierce the night sky. Somewhere out there, she imagined the faint echo of a piano key being pressed, tender, deliberate, whole. And for the first time since the morning, her chest lifted. Not because the pain had gone, but because someone somewhere had heard it and chosen not to look away. The workshop smelled of cedar shavings, oil, and quiet ambition. Elon had never built a piano before, never even thought to. But when he ran his fingers across the ruins of Helena's shattered instrument, something inside him decided that he would not just repair it. He would revive it. He made no announcement, no speech, just walked into the local university one morning, met with a few engineers he respected, and asked a single question. What would it take to rebuild a piano from a woman's memory? Most blinked. A few tilted their heads. One said yes. That was enough. Over the next few weeks, Elon's garage morphed into a strange, harmonious cross between a laboratory and a carpenter's studio. Blueprints hung on the walls, but so tambum did photographs of Helena's old piano, taken by Sierra with a child's instinct to preserve what matters. The little girl became a fixture there, curling up with a book in the corner, watching quietly as artisans shaped the curved wooden frame with reverence, like monks rebuilding a chapel after a fire. Elon didn't lead with authority, he led with care. He asked questions, listened carefully, argued when it mattered. No, he'd say when technician offered plastic keys. It has to feel exactly like the old one. She'll know if it doesn't. When someone proposed tuning adjustments to modernize the sound, he dismissed it. This isn't about sound, he explained. This is about memory, muscle, meaning. And so they worked. Every string was measured against the tension of possibility. Every key was fitted with the silence between pain and resilience. Every coat of varnish was tested until it resembled not the original piano, but Helena's recollection of it. The way her hands had danced on its surface, the way her breath paused just before each note. Sierra would occasionally place her own fingers along the unfinished keyboard, mimicking the shape of songs she barely remembered, her eyes darting toward Elon as if asking, "Is this what she used to play?" Sometimes Helena came too, never for long, never announcing herself. She would appear at the edge of the doorway like a ghost from another era, watch in silence, then slowly walk toward the frame, now reassembled, standing like the skeleton of something not quite alive, not quite gone. She wouldn't speak. She never had to. She simply laid her fingers atop the raw, unfinished keys and closed her eyes, as if testing the sound within her own body. One afternoon, as dust motes floated lazily in the sunbeam cutting through the workshop window, Helena lingered longer than usual. Elon watched from across the room, holding his breath. She didn't move. Her palms rested softly against the new wood. Then, without looking up, she whispered, barely audible, almost lost in the creaking of the boards, "It's almost ready." That night, Elon stayed up until 3 in the morning, fine-tuning the action, adjusting the tension on the pedal rods, sanding down the last tiny ridge on the edge of a key. It had to be perfect, not just playable, perfect in the language Helena didn't speak, but understood with her entire being. The following day, he didn't knock on her door. He didn't announce his arrival. He simply wheeled the piano, now whole again, elegant in its quiet power, down the stone path to the small alley where Helena sometimes painted in long, contemplative silences. Sierra helped guide the wheels, placing flat stones under the cart when the terrain dipped. Her hands were small but firm. Helena stood in the doorway, as if she had sensed them coming. Elon stopped just outside the threshold. The piano gleamed in the afternoon light, cherrywood body, ivory keys, brass pedals polished until they caught the sun like soft lightning. He didn't speak. He stepped back as if to say, "It's yours now." Helena looked at him, then at Sierra, then at the instrument. For a moment, she didn't move, just breathed. The wind rustled the grass behind her, and her hair lifted slightly, brushing across her cheeks. Then, wordlessly, she stepped inside. The piano followed. Elon pushed it carefully, guiding it over the small gap in the doorway, setting it gently near the window where the light always fell longest. Helena approached it like one approaches something sacred. Her fingers hesitated just above the keys, hovering, not yet ready. Sierra stood near the back of the room, arms folded in front of her chest, barely breathing. Then Helena sat. The first note was cautious. Just one. A soft, low hum that rang out and dissolved into the room like the echo of something remembered rather than played. Then another, and another. She closed her eyes. The melody that followed was not one Elon recognized. It was neither classical nor modern, neither sad nor joyous. It was something else entirely. It was her, raw, unvarnished, vulnerable. A sound that did not seek to be understood, but simply to exist. Her hands moved faster now, confident. The notes rose, then fell, paused, surged again. She wasn't playing for an audience. She wasn't performing. She was remembering who she was before fear had shaped her. Elon didn't move, didn't blink. He felt as if any movement might tear the moment apart. Sierra, still in the corner, slowly walked closer. She sat cross-legged near the piano's bench, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open in awe. When the final note came, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a breath held in suspension, like the tide waiting to return. Helena opened her eyes. She didn't look at Elon, not at first. Instead, she placed both palms on the top of the piano and leaned forward, resting her forehead against the polished wood. A long breath escaped her lips. Only then did she glance up toward him. Her eyes, clear gray, unguarded, found his. There were no words. None were needed. She had been broken, and now she was beginning again. The rain came without warning, heavy and urgent, drumming against the windows like a clock ticking down to an invisible decision. Inside her modest kitchen, Helena sat in silence. The piano, Elon's gift, her redemption, stood a few feet away, its surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. She had just played, not for anyone, not even for herself, but for the space between memory and desire. The notes still echoed faintly in her bones, but they brought no clarity. Only the question that had been growing inside her for weeks. What do you do when your heart belongs to more than one past? She had loved Logan once. Not in the romanticized way Sierra imagined when she drew pictures of their family, but in the real way, marked by duty, struggle, survival. He had been the one who stood by her when no one else did, when Sierra was still learning to walk, and she was still learning to hope. But love, like music, had to be felt, not only understood. And with Logan, everything had become a transaction of fears. With Elon, it was different. There were no demands, no expectations. Just listening, just space. The 3 letters sat before her now. 3 white sheets, folded with a precision she no longer believed herself capable of. She had spent the entire evening composing them, writing and rewriting, tearing and restarting. In the end, they each came out simple. She didn't have the strength for flourishes. The one for Sierra was the hardest. It spoke of trust, of temporary distance, of the kind of love that needs no proof. "I am not leaving you," she wrote. "I am stepping aside to hear myself. And when I return, I will be more whole for both of us." The one for Logan was a mirror. Not a punishment, but a reflection. "You are not the villain," she wrote, "but I cannot be the echo of your silence. I need to live outside the outlines you draw in your mind." And the one for Elon, it was barely a whisper on paper. "If what we have is true, it will survive time." She placed each letter into an envelope, labeling them with quiet hands. Her suitcase was already packed, just enough for a few weeks away. Books, a notebook, a change of clothes, a scarf Sierra had gifted her, and a black and white photo of the three of them before everything became complicated. She didn't know what she was going to find in the town she chose, Driscoll, a quiet place just 40 miles north. But she hoped it would be silence of a different kind. Not the kind Logan imposed, not the kind she wrapped herself in, but the kind that cleansed. The next morning, Sierra awoke to find the note first. She read it 3 times, lips moving with the words, then placed it gently beside her pillow like a fragile artifact. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She walked outside and sat by the broken tree in the backyard, the one that never grew quite straight, and waited for the sun to rise. Logan, reading his letter, stood frozen by the kitchen sink, water still running into a cup he had meant to fill. He wanted to shout, to accuse, but the words didn't come. He wasn't angry at Helena, not exactly. He was angry at the space between them, the one that had grown quietly, like ivy, until it covered the foundation. He turned off the tap, sat down, and read the letter again. And Elon received his note while sitting in his workshop, a half-dismantled satellite module before him. When he opened the envelope and saw the single line, he exhaled, a sound too complex to be relief or disappointment. He read it again. Then he folded the paper back into the envelope and slid it into a drawer beside a photograph of a much younger version of himself holding a model rocket. He didn't move for a long time. Outside, the wind carried the scent of wet earth and rebirth. In Driscoll, Helena found a small cottage near the edge of town. It overlooked an abandoned railway and a line of cypress trees that swayed like metronomes in the breeze. She spent her mornings walking, her afternoons journaling, and her nights listening to the rhythm of her own breath. Sometimes she would trace imaginary keys on the table. Sometimes she would hum a melody only she remembered. There were no decisions made yet, only space. That was enough. Back home, Sierra began taking long walks with Elon, not always talking, sometimes just pointing at birds or asking odd, philosophical questions. Do you think songs ever get lonely if no one plays them anymore? Elon would pause, think seriously, and say something like, maybe, but maybe they're just resting. Logan cooked more. He cleaned the house twice as often. He tried, in his own way, to create a world Helena might want to return to. But the harder he tried to reshape himself, the more he realized he didn't fully know who he was without her. For the first time, he faced the truth. He had never asked who Helena truly was. He had only ever asked her to stay. Weeks passed. The letters became symbols. Elon stopped checking his phone. Logan stopped pacing the hallway. Sierra stopped waiting by the gate. Life moved like a slow current, bending around the absence, but not stopping for it. And in her little cottage, Helena woke up one morning and realized she could breathe again without guilt. Not because everything was solved, but because the music inside her had returned. Quietly, insistently, like a bird tapping on the glass. She walked to her notebook, tore out a fresh page, and began to write. The day Helena returned was marked by no grand gesture. No parades of clouds parted. No music swelled in the background. Just the hum of cicadas in the Texan spring and the heavy scent of mesquite hanging in the air. She stepped down from a bus with nothing but a duffel bag slung over her shoulder and a single sheet of music, carefully folded, tucked against her chest. Her boots made little noise on the gravel road as she walked toward the house she had once left behind, each step both an arrival and a confession. From the porch, Sierra caught the first glimpse. The little girl blinked, uncertain if her eyes were playing tricks on her. But when the figure came into focus, the unmistakable stride, the severe elegance of posture, the straight dark hair gathered in its usual manner, Sierra let out a cry that cracked the stillness. "Mama!" She ran so fast she tripped on her own excitement, catching herself with scraped knees but not slowing down. Helena bent just in time to scoop her up, arms wrapping around the girl's frame, as if trying to remember how she had ever let her go. Sierra laughed and sobbed all at once, clinging to her mother's neck, whispering, "I missed you. I missed you so much," again and again, as if afraid Helena might vanish again if she stopped. Helena buried her face in her daughter's curls, breathing in the smell of crayons and earth and childhood. Her hands trembled, not from exhaustion, but from a kind of fullness she hadn't felt in months. A few yards away, Elon stood near the old pecan tree, watching silently. He had been repairing a solar panel on the workshop roof when he saw the bus stop. From the distance, her silhouette had frozen in mid-motion. It wasn't that he didn't believe she'd return someday, but he had trained himself not to expect it. He had let go, as one lets go of a bird resting on their hand, not to lose it, but to let it fly if it needs to. Helena noticed him, but didn't speak. After Sierra's arms reluctantly uncurled from her waist, she whispered something in the girl's ear. Sierra nodded and ran toward the house. Then, with the same calm, slow cadence that marked her every movement, Helena walked toward Elon. She stopped a few feet away, pulled the folded page from her coat pocket, and held it out to him with both hands. He took it gently, eyes scanning the title written at the top in her fine handwriting, "For the One Who Waited." Underneath, the notation curled and danced, a melody written for two hands and two hearts. "I composed it for you," she wrote quickly in her small notepad. She held it up like a quiet offering. Elon stared at her for a moment, then at the page, and then again at her. He didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't reach for a hug or a kiss. He simply nodded, a single movement, slow and deliberate, not just acknowledgement but acceptance. An answer. She had chosen, and that was enough. That night, as twilight softened the edges of the day, two pianos were placed side by side in Elon's studio. The restored one, the phoenix from the ashes, and his own, slightly out of tune, but always loyal. Sierra watched from the corner, curled up on a blanket with a sketch pad on her lap, wide-eyed and silent. Helena sat first. She didn't warm up or test the keys. She simply placed her fingers in position and looked at Elon. He gave the slightest lift of his eyebrows, a silent, "ready when you are." And she began. The opening notes were delicate, tentative, like a door creaking open after a long winter. Then his chords joined hers, low and steady, grounding her melody like roots holding a tree. The composition was both conversation and confession, questions in her treble, answered by the calm logic of his bass. Then, as the phrases evolved, the roles reversed. He became the seeker, she the responder. Their timing was intuitive, their pauses deliberate. It was not perfection. There were hesitations, stumbles, moments when I had to listen more carefully, but it was real. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, as if nature itself paused to listen. Inside, the room pulsed with something that felt both ancient and newborn. By the time they reached the final bars, neither of them was looking at the sheet music. It had become irrelevant. Their eyes met, and the last chord, played together, hung in the air like an unanswered question or a promise yet to unfold. Sierra clapped, soft and sincere. "That was the prettiest song I've ever heard," she whispered, as if afraid to disturb the magic. Helena smiled gently, nodding. Elon leaned back on his bench, hands resting in his lap, looking at the piano as though it had told him a secret. They didn't speak about what had happened during the months apart. There were no apologies, no probing questions. There would be time for all of that, or maybe not. Maybe some things didn't need to be explained. Maybe music was enough. Later that evening, as Sierra drifted asleep upstairs, Elon poured 2 glasses of wine. He didn't say anything when he handed Helena hers. She took it with a small bow of her head. They sat near the open window, a soft breeze moving the curtains, and the quiet between them was no longer strained. It was peaceful. Companionship reknit itself not through declarations, but through shared space, like 2 rivers learning how to flow side by side without colliding. And when Helena reached out, not for his hand, but for a pencil to begin sketching another composition, Elon smiled quietly to himself. This wasn't a finish line. It was a new overture. The idea came to Elon one morning as the sun poured through the open windows of Helena's studio. She was there, eyes closed, fingers brushing the keys, coaxing music from the silence like a whisper from a wound now healing. Sierra sat in a corner, humming along and tapping rhythm with her heel. The morning was slow, like honey and sunlight, and Elon found himself breathing easier in that space. Not thinking, feeling. He watched them, Helena, whole again, though not untouched, Sierra, vibrant, yet grounded in a way children often aren't, and himself, somewhere in between wonder and belonging. It stirred something ancient in him. Not ambition, not innovation, something else, purpose, maybe, or perhaps responsibility. That afternoon, while Helena taught Sierra to play a Debussy prelude with patience only love allows, Elon quietly sketched the blueprint of a dream. He called it Solar Echo. The idea was simple yet bold, a community music center entirely powered by solar energy, accessible to all, especially children from underfunded schools, rural towns, and broken systems. A sanctuary for sound, a shelter for the unheard. He imagined rows of practice rooms bathed in natural light, pianos tuned not just in pitch, but in empathy, and young minds discovering not only chords and harmonies, but dignity and voice. When he told Helena, she said nothing at first. Just looked at him, long and steady, like she did the first night he opened his home to her silence. Then, slowly, she reached across the table and touched the edge of the plan with her fingertips. Music, she wrote on her notepad, is also light. He nodded. It began the next day. Helena threw herself into the project. She didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted to teach, to build, to shape the center from the ground up. Elon assigned a Tesla team to oversee the energy grid design, using the latest photovoltaic tiles and battery walls. But it was Helena who chose the room's acoustics, the curvature of the practice booths, the orientation of the stage. She insisted the windows face west. Music, she explained, should catch the last light. Sierra became her mother's shadow, not just helping, but becoming part of the fabric of the place. She gave lessons to younger kids on how to read rhythm by clapping and dancing. She painted signs with musical notes and named each room after a different element: wind, water, fire, earth, echo. She renamed the bathroom Silence and giggled every time someone knocked on it. Then came the unexpected twist: Logan. He had kept his distance after Helena's return, not out of anger but reverence. He'd changed, or perhaps he had simply begun to look inward with clearer eyes. One morning, unannounced as always, he drove up in his battered truck and waited outside the construction site. Elon saw him through the dust and sunlight, leaning against the hood with arms crossed. They talked alone. No accusations, no defensiveness, just long pauses and a question that Elon hadn't expected. Would you accept a piece of land just outside town? Unused, south-facing, yours if you want it. Elon looked at him. Logan's face was still hard, still weathered, but something was different. Less burdened, more still. Why? Elon asked. Logan shrugged. Some things need to grow, not die. I can't fix what I broke, but I don't have to keep breaking. Helena said nothing when she heard. But later that day, she left a small drawing in Sierra's notebook, a heart stitched back together with piano strings. Construction began in earnest. Locals pitched in: a retired carpenter who used to tune guitars, a teenage welder who played drums at his church, a woman in a wheelchair who used to sing opera before her voice left her. Everyone brought something. The place began to live before it was even complete. And when it opened on a bright, wind-swept morning in early spring, there were no speeches, just music. Helena and Elon played the opening notes together in the courtyard, surrounded by families, workers, and children. Sierra danced barefoot to the melody, her curls bouncing like little exclamation points in the air. Logan watched from the back. His eyes were unreadable, but he stayed through the whole performance. Solar Echo became more than a building. It was rhythm in wood and steel. It was harmony between the old and new, and it was forgiveness made audible. Helena taught there every day. Sometimes she improvised for hours while children lay on the ground and listened with their eyes closed. Sometimes she sat in silence, letting others take the lead. Her smile was no longer guarded. Her hands, once tense and withdrawn, moved freely across the keys. She had become not just a teacher, but a presence. Sierra thrived. She told Elon she wanted to compose a ballet one day. But the dancers will be trees, she added, and the stage will be outside, and everyone will have to be barefoot. Even you. Elon smiled and agreed, not because it made sense, but because it mattered. And Elon, he changed too. He spoke more slowly, laughed more often. He no longer tried to fix everything immediately. Sometimes he sat alone in the courtyard, just listening. Not to problems, to music, to wind, to children's laughter. And once, to the echo of Helena's laughter as it carried out the open windows. That was when he understood. Innovation could start with a spark, but healing began with listening. The project had begun with solar panels. But in truth, it was powered by something deeper, the courage to begin again. The hall was full, but the air felt like breath held in unison. The old theater in Austin, recently restored, smelled faintly of varnished wood and anticipation. A beam of late afternoon light crept through the side curtain as the audience took their seats, whispering, shifting, waiting. The program read only one name under the final performance: Helena Strauss, Texan Sky, original composition. Backstage, Helena stood before a full-length mirror, but she wasn't adjusting anything. Her fingers hovered lightly over her thighs, like they did over keys before a performance. Her eyes, still that rare stormy gray, didn't look at her reflection. They looked through it, beyond it, into the years folded behind her. Sierra was now a teenager, tall and vibrant, helping to coordinate the event. She had inherited her mother's hands, but used them to conduct youth orchestras now. Elon had arrived just after the second performance began, quietly slipping into a seat in the back. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to listen. Helena walked on stage alone. She wore a long, charcoal dress that moved with her like ink flowing over paper. Her hair was up, but loosely, as if she had better things to do than worry about symmetry. The applause that greeted her was warm but restrained, people knew. This wasn't a show, it was a moment. She sat at the piano, a custom grand with solar-inscribed panels on the sides, gifted to her by the very center she helped build. The silence that followed was not nervous. It was sacred. And then she began. The first notes were sparse, almost hesitant, like rain lightly touching a metal roof. Then came the melody, simple, aching, familiar. Texan Sky wasn't about Texas. It was about the wind that bends sunflowers but never breaks them. It was about the feeling of watching someone leave and trusting they'll return because they want to, not because they must. It was about every unspoken word between her and Elon, and the ones that had been spoken and still hung gently between them like wind chimes. The middle section rose and twisted into a storm, angular chords, unresolved dissonance, a tension that made hearts in the room race with something like memory. Then came the resolve. The clouds parted in music, and a single phrase repeated softly, each time simpler, lighter. Her fingers fluttered in the upper register, echoing lullabies no one remembered learning, but everyone had heard once in childhood. And then the last note. It was barely audible. It seemed to hover in the space like mist before dawn, not asking for applause, but offering release. And for a moment, no one moved. No one even breathed. Then, as if something ancient had been answered, the applause erupted, not wild, not chaotic, but deep and full, like waves hitting sand in rhythm with a full moon. From his seat in the back, Elon stood, but didn't clap. He just watched. His face was still, but his eyes glistened with something raw and unfiltered. He had seen rockets rise, stars explode, even empires grow and crumble under his gaze. But this was something else. Something rarer. A human becoming whole, note by note. As people filtered out after the performance, chatting in low voices, someone nudged Elon lightly on the shoulder. It was a woman in her 60s with a program folded neatly in her hand. "Excuse me," she asked, "are you her husband?" Elon looked at her, then toward the stage where Helena still stood, accepting a few final flowers. He smiled, a smile that curved slowly, pulled by gravity and memory. "No," he said, "I'm the man who had the luck to hear her first note." Later, outside, the sky above Austin was blushing pink and lavender. The city lights were just beginning to flicker on, and the smell of creosote from a nearby street lamp floated in the air. Helena joined him on the steps, the last few guests slipping away behind them. She didn't speak. She handed him a new page of sheet music. "Another piece?" he asked. She shook her head gently and pointed to the title. It read, "The Man Who Listened." He held the paper without opening it, knowing the music would be there when he was ready, just like she had been. If you followed this story until now, I'd love to know something. Where in the world are you watching from? And here's a quiet challenge. No emojis, no hashtags, just heart. Tell me which moment in this story made you pause. Not the biggest twist or the saddest line, but your moment. The one you felt. Let's make this comment section a chorus of real people listening to each other.